Hey, you're never gonna believe it. After 4 years, 275 days, 8 hours, 9 minutes, and 26 videos later, the Airstream is done. So come on in, check it out. Actually, wait. We should do the build video first, and then you can come check it out. So, roll footage. It has been so long since I've worked on this Airstream that I don't even remember how to work on an Airstream. But can I tell you a little secret? When I was working on the Airstream, I didn't know how to work on an Airstream either, so why should this be any different? With that, let's get to work. Now, the last things that I need to do in the Airstream are build the cabinet for the little bathroom vanity area, and of course, build a wall and door for the bathroom, so that, you have a little privacy while you're doing your thing. So after taking some rough measurements off of the Airstream itself, I went into the shop and I cut down some scrap pieces of plywood that I can use as sort of an anchor to build my cabinets off of. Building cabinets in the Airstream is always funny because in the normal world, I would build a full-on carcass and just go set it in place. But considering we're trying to conserve as much weight as possible, we want the cabinets to be as light and bare-boned as possible. So I started out by just screwing 2 pieces of 1/2-inch plywood to that back wall. This will give me something to anchor and build everything off of. Then I took a tape measure and a level, and I measured from the floor up to my level, once it was level, to figure out all my dimensions, and I drew up this crazy looking face frame. I know, you probably have a lot of questions. So do I. That's a lot of different pieces. Let's just hook it together and see if it works. So back into the shop I went to start cutting down some poplar to the correct sizes and lengths. Well, before I could really cut them to the right length, I had to mill them all up because I didn't pay the extra money to get them straight lines. So Cheap Jason wins again. Got to do all the millwork myself. Anyways, after I got all the millwork complete, it was over to the table saw to rip everything to the correct width and then finally cut it to the right length. Now, the idea behind my cabinet is there's going to be doors over on the right side, and then on the left side, I'm going to build this little cubby that you can store toilet paper in, but that cubby is going to be open, so there's not going to be any drawers in this, just 2 cabinet doors and an open cubby. And it's got to fit over the wheel well, so it's got to be a very specific size and shape that's got to fit between the 2 walls. And this is going to be the entire front of our cabinet that's going to also support the countertops. So yeah, it's got to be nice and beefy. After I got all my pieces laid out, they looked something like this. And if you're still confused, don't worry, it will all make sense eventually. I'm confused too. Now, although this face frame looks crazy, I'm going to hook it together the same way I would do any face frame for a set of cabinets, and that's just some glue and pocket holes. So I grabbed the pocket hole jig and started drilling those out. I did have to notch out this little section over here on the left to fit around the water pipe that hooks into the toilet. So I did that off camera. That's what that little notch is. Now, where my cubby for the toilet paper is, I wanted to make sure that the toilet paper didn't fall out onto the floor while we're rumbling down the road. I happen to have this brass rod laying around, so I figured I could insert that into the face frame and it would be a nice little catch to hold the toilet paper. So I got a roll of toilet paper just to make sure everything was the right size, and I marked where I needed to drill my holes to insert my brass rod. Then I took a really nice video of my arm. But while my arm was there, I was really drilling holes for that brass rod. It's going to fit into my face frame like you just saw right there. Now that I have all my pieces cut and everything pocket holed and the holes drilled for my brass rod, I can finally start hooking everything together with those pocket screws and glue. A little zip, little zap, little zoop, and this cabinet's almost done for the place that you're going to poop. The bathroom. That's what I was trying to say with that little rhyme. Anyways, before long, I had all the pocket screws screwed into all the pocket holes, and this is the weirdest face frame I possibly have ever made. I think this is gonna work, but I'm really not sure. Anyways, the next morning I carried it into the Airstream to test the fit, and sure enough, I must know how to use a tape measure because it slid right in there and was snug as a bug in a rug. There was just one little problem. On the list of things that were snug as a bug in a rug, I'm afraid that whoever uses this toilet will also be pretty darn snug. I mean, I know this is an RV bathroom, and RV bathrooms are not known for being large, but the face frame made it pretty tight when you're sitting on the potty. So I decided to take the face frame and cut it in half, because that's what you do when you change your mind. I did remove those pocket screws. Don't worry, I didn't cut through them with a table saw. But my thought process was, instead of sticking the face frame on the front of the wheel well, if I mounted it on the top of the wheel well, I would get an extra 3/4 of an inch, which I know doesn't seem like that much space, but I think it'll actually make a pretty big difference. So after cutting the entire bottom off of the face frame and reworking it a little bit, I took it back into the Airstream, set it on top of the wheel well, and just as I thought, it gave you just enough space to comfortably sit on that toilet. See, these are the important things in life. So with the overall size and design of the face frame done, it was time to work on the aesthetics. Now this bottom hole that you see in the face frame is actually just going to be a decorative panel. And instead of recessing one into the parts and pieces of the face frame itself, I thought it would be much easier just to rabbet out a groove on the back and glue in a piece of 1/4-inch MDF. So you're never going to believe what I did. I rabbeted out a groove on the back and I glued in a piece of 1/4-inch MDF. Didn't see that coming, did you? After I got a little glue in there, flipped it around, made sure it looked like I wanted it to. I just tacked it in place with a couple 23 gauge brad nails until that glue dried, and hopefully it'll stay put for ever. Then I gave the entire face frame a nice little sandy sandaroo and carried it back into the Airstream to screw it in place. I just attached it directly to the wheel well and both walls with some pocket screws, and how spacious is this toilet now. Now for the countertop. Now, I didn't think the face frame and just those back brace pieces of plywood would be enough support, so I added some little stretcher pieces connecting that back brace piece and the front face frame, and then I had to figure out the undermount sink. So after kind of just lightly setting the sink in place, I realized that I had to build some other bracing to hold the sink, kind of a little sink cradle. So after some cutting and some measuring and some drilling and some spacing, I finally had everything situated just right so that the sink could sit down on these new plywood braces, hold it in place, and it would be just below the surface of the face frame and that back support, which means it should be at the perfect height for it to be an undermount sink when it comes to our countertop. But before I put the countertop on, there was one more thing I had to finish, and that was the little toilet paper holder cubby situation. So I ripped down some pieces of 1/2-inch Baltic birch, I glued them together and tacked them together with a 16 gauge brad nailer. Then I pulled the Craig jig back out and I added all sorts of pocket holes around the perimeter so that I would have a way to attach my cubby to the face frame. And then the cubby's not going to be very good if it doesn't have a back on it because the toilet paper will just fall into the cabinet. So I cut down a piece of 1/4-inch Baltic birch and I glued and tacked that onto the back. Then it was back into the Airstream to hook it all into place. This is pretty simple. I just held it up to that giant hole in the face frame, and once I had it in the right position, I screwed some pocket screws through those pocket holes, and voila, installed. Now on to the countertop. Now for the countertop, I have some leftover Duraresin, whatever the heck that plastic crap was that I used in the kitchen. Anyways, I'm going to use that for the countertop in the bathroom because I already have it, and then everything will be all matchy-matchy. So just like for the kitchen countertop, we have to first make a plywood template so that we can get it cut to just the right size. So after cutting a piece of plywood to fit on top of my face frame, I measured and marked where the center of the sink was. Then using the little paper template that came with the sink and some spray adhesive, I glued the paper template onto my plywood template so that I can cut out the exact shape of the sink on my plywood template, and then obviously use that to cut it out in my actual countertop material. Now, while I was using spray adhesive to stick this paper template down, I was thinking I'll just cut this out with a jigsaw. But after I thought through that a little bit more, I realized that's not going to be very accurate. There might be a whole bunch of chatter. So instead, I took it over to my shaper station, and then using the shaper origin, I just on the machine designed that exact oval shape. I had to play around with it a little bit until I got the size just right. And then I just used the origin to cut out a perfect oval, or ellipse, whatever you want to call this. And once I took it back into the Airstream to test the fit, it did not fit. No, I'm just joking. It fit perfect. Have a little more faith in me, will ya? Now you would think I'd go immediately to cut the shape out of the countertop material, but because I'm a little ADD, I got sidetracked hooking up all the plumbing underneath the cabinet for the sink and the drain and all that jazz. But as soon as I was done with that, then I went into the shop, grabbed some Durazine, whatever the stuff's called, and it was time to cut our final countertop shape. I started out by just tracing the rough shape of the template onto the resin material and then cut it out with the track saw. Now I could have put a mask on and some safety glasses and hooked the track saw up to a dust collector, but that would have been way too smart. I also could have taken the track saw and cut the other end of this piece off, but why do that when you can just let go and let nature cut it for you? Yeah, that works. Once I had the general overall perimeter shape of my plywood template cut onto the resin material, I used some double-sided tape to stick said plywood template to said resin material, and then it was time to cut out our oval for the sink. So very carefully, I flipped over that plywood, and very carefully I lined up all the edges, and then not carefully at all, I pushed really hard to make sure the tape was nice and sticky. Oh, I also drilled a hole through both. This is going to be for the faucet on the sink. I had to put that off to the side because there wasn't going to be enough room with the curvature of the Airstream to put it directly behind the sink. But I think that's okay. Then using a little flush trim router bit from Bits and Bits with a top mounted bearing, I cut out my oval shape, and I'm pretty sure the countertop's done at this point. There's only one way to find out. Back into the Airstream. This is how confident I was. I didn't even do a test fit before I started laying down silicone. I was just like, let's get this silicone on there and let's get this countertop in. And if it doesn't fit, well, not my problem. Even though it totally would have been my problem, but lucky for you and lucky for me, I mean, it was the same exact size and shape as the plywood, so why wouldn't it fit? You thought it wasn't gonna fit, didn't you? You really thought I was building that up because in the end it wasn't gonna fit. Jeez, I mean, when are you gonna learn that at least 20% of the time I get it right on the first try, all right? And this just happened to be one of those times. With the countertop installed and the satisfying plastic removed, I installed the faucet off to the side there, and we were ready to make some doors.
Hey, I want to give a big thanks to AG1 for sponsoring this video. Now you might be saying, what is AG1? I've been hearing about it all over the place. Well, AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that supports whole body health, making sure that all your nutritional bases are covered. So confused? Don't worry, I'll explain further. You see, instead of addressing one area of the body, foundational nutrition supplements raise our baseline health through a science-driven formulation of micronutrients, phytonutrients, and essential symbiotics. And one of the hardest parts with my job is that I travel a lot, and it's always hard to stay consistent with my diet. Now, I've been using AG1 for the past 3 years now, and I love it because I can take the little travel packets with me wherever I go, and I know at least one part of my diet stays consistent, and I feel great. Are you worried about getting old? I mean, come on, be honest, we all are. Did you know that AG1 actually helps support healthy aging? because it supports your immune system, your gut, your brain. All that stuff is in there to help you age with grace. And my favorite part about AG1, apart from the fact that it tastes great, is that it is so easy to add into your daily health routine. All you do is take 1 scoop of the green powder, you add it to 8 to 12 ounces of water, just like that, and you stir it up. And it mixes really easy with the water, so you don't have to spend a ton of time shaking it or pureeing it. It just goes right in there and enjoy. If you want to try this AG1 stuff for yourself, just go to drinkag1.com/bourbonmoth and you'll get a free welcome packet, which includes a shaker, a canister, and a year's supply of the immune supporting vitamin D3 plus K2, which is this little guy here. Just put a few little drops in with your AG1 and you're good to go. You can click the link down below or scan the QR code right around here or there, wherever I decide to put it in, and you're all set.
The last step to having our cabinet completely constructed is our cabinet doors. So I took the measurements off of the rough opening on the cabinets and then back into the shop to start chopping up some more poplar. Now I'm going to build a standard rail and style shaker style cabinet door like I do for pretty much everything else, because let's just take a moment and be honest. That's all my wife wants. I'm always like, honey, let's do something crazy. She's like, no, simple, clean. And I'm like, but wouldn't it look good if no? Simple and clean. Yeah, but what if we no? So finally, after years of this, I just gave up and I pretty much only do shaker style cabinet doors now. But if you want to learn exactly how I do them, I do have a video on how I make these. So I'll put a little tag right up in the top corner and you can click on it and make your wife happy too. Anyways, after I got the doors constructed and I drilled them out for my hinges, I inserted my hinges and then it was back into the Airstream to do a little test fit, install them and make sure they open and close with enough reveal on all the sides. This isn't just an Airstream thing. I recommend whenever you're building any sort of cabinets that you always do a test fit with your doors and drawer faces before you paint, because it is the worst when you think they're gonna fit and then you paint everything and then you go to install them and they don't fit and you gotta trim them down, but now you gotta repaint because you got an exposed raw edge, so don't do that. Anyways, speaking of paint, it was time to paint the cabinet. So I removed the toilet. Why I didn't remove the toilet when I was actually building the cabinet, because it would have made my life a whole lot easier, I don't know, but I did it now, and that's what matters. I painted the cabinet in the Airstream by hand, and then I sprayed the doors in my shop, because I really didn't want to try and spray the cabinet in the Airstream. That would have been no fun at all. If you're wondering what that color is, it's called Spun Sugar from Sherwin-Williams, so if there's anything you want to paint pink in your house, that's the color you're looking for. My wife picked it out. With the cabinet painted, it was time to paint the floors. Yes, paint the floors. Because we decided instead of laying some sort of flooring, we're just gonna paint it. And this was actually my idea. I like the way painted floors look, and I like that they're super easy to maintain. If you ever need to touch them up, you just put more paint down, and if you ever change your mind on what you want the floor to look like, well, you just get a different colored paint. And because it's on the floor, it's really easy. You just get a roller, paintbrush, and Scooby-Dooby-Doo, paint on you. Or in this case, the floor. And calm down before you get your panties in a bunch. That is not white. I know you're probably thinking, you painted the floor white, you monster. It's off-white, so that makes it acceptable. After letting the floor paint cure for a few days, I went into the Airstream and removed all the tape. And it looks pretty darn good. I'm happy with that. So with the floor completely painted, I reinstalled the toilet, which luckily was just a few bolts and nuts and installed. And then I also installed my freshly painted cabinet doors. Now I added a pretty heavy duty magnet to keep these doors shut. I mean, they're actually kind of hard to pull open. But I also added a latch on the front so that you'd have something to grab onto, and that latch matched the latches on all of our other cabinets. And with that, it was time to get started on one of the very last steps, building the wall and door for the bathroom itself. Back to this old joy of building walls inside of an Airstream where nothing is square. But luckily for me, I'm not going across the curve of the Airstream on this wall. I'm going with the length, so it shouldn't be too bad. I cut one piece to one length, I put it in place, and would you believe this has never happened in the entire Airstream build? It fit perfect on the very first try. I know, I was pretty shocked too. Now, one sheet of plywood wasn't wide enough to build the entire wall, so I'm gonna have to do it in two separate pieces and have a seam in the middle. But I don't think that's gonna be that big a deal, and you'll see why in a little bit. I cut my second piece. It wasn't quite as tight of a fit, but it got the job done, and we had a nice opening and somewhat of a wall formed for the bathroom. Then I took all those plywood pieces back out to the shop, and you guessed it, I added a bunch more pocket holes because that's how you install everything in an Airstream. Pocket screw here, pocket screw there, and supposedly you're good to go for years to come. I mean, the screws are going into metal, so it's pretty secure. Anyways, after adding all those pocket holes, I wiggled all the plywood pieces back into place, and I started just screwing everything together. I always add probably more screws than I need when it comes to installing things, but it just makes sense. I mean, this thing's gonna be bumping down the road. You don't want it falling apart on you. Once I got everything screwed together on that corner and all the pocket screws installed on the top and the bottom and the sides, it was time to figure out the door. Now, there wasn't enough room to do a traditional pocket door, mainly because the wall is only 1/2 inch thick, so where the heck would I put a pocket? So I'm gonna use pocket door hardware, but I'm gonna kind of do a hybrid version where it's kind of a pocket door / barn door. And when I say pocket door / barn door, what I really mean is it's a barn door. I just used pocket door hardware because, I don't know, that's what I had and I thought it would work well. Basically, I built out this little lip on the front of the wall to mount the pocket door hardware to. That's the nice silver track you see, and it's got these little rolling sliders. And then I cut this nice trim piece to fit over that. This took quite a bit of scribing to get it tight up against the ceiling. I didn't want to show you all that because it was frustrating, and I messed up the first one and I had to remake it anyways. The point is, I made that trim piece at the top and one on the side, and I created this nice little box to cover up the pocket door hardware. Next, I needed to hide the exposed plywood edges on my plywood wall, which was the entire interior of the bathroom opening. So I picked up some wood corner trim and I trimmed out the entire opening, and it looked pretty nice. And then I did the same thing to that far corner to cover up that exposed plywood, and the bathroom wall was pretty much ready for paint. All I needed to do now was build a bathroom door. So late in the evening, I went back into the shop and I started milling down some 8/4 poplar. Now, my initial plan was to make the door about 1.5 inches thick. But this particular poplar had other plans. It was so wonky and warped and twisted that by the time I got it milled down and flat, it was about 1 inch thick. So I decided to make the door 1 inch thick. After getting it milled, I ripped it all down to the correct widths, and then I started adding a nice dadoed groove on the bottom of each piece so that I could float a 1/2 inch sheet of plywood as my center panel. After getting my groove all situated in my 4 frame pieces, I did a little tester to cut my tenons and make sure those would fit nice and tight. Something like this. Basically, I'm making a giant shaker style door. Did I mention that that's all that my wife ever wants? And I would like to possibly do something a little more exciting, but, well, you know, happy marriages, gotta have 'em. With all the pieces for my frame cut out and dry fit together, I cut a piece of 1/2 inch ply, the correct size to slide in there, and I easily slid it in. I just very lightly slid it. Oh geez. I possibly made these dados a little tight. So when plan A doesn't work, you go to plan B. Instead of sliding the entire thing into a partly assembled frame, I just hooked the plywood into one piece and then kind of hammered on the remaining frame pieces, which actually worked very well. And to be honest, I'd rather have that panel fit nice and tight than too loose. So pretty soon I had the entire door put together and in clamps, and I was ready to call it a night. The next morning I came out bright and early and, ooh, a door. It'll kind of slide like that, just to give you an idea. Next, I hooked on the pocket door hardware on the top of the door, making sure it was positioned correctly, and then I manhandled that giant door through that little opening in the Airstream, and I wiggled it and shimmied it into place. The nice thing about pocket door hardware, it's specifically made to install the track when you build a wall, and then you can lock the door into place afterwards. So it's got these nice little clip hangers that clip into the little wheel thingamabobs, and then there's this little tab that flops over to lock everything in. Anyways, the test fit went pretty good, so I removed the door, and now it was time to paint it. I learned a long time ago if you're going to paint doors and you install 2 screws on the end that you can paint both sides of the door at the same time by just rotating the entire door on one of the screws. Ooh, handy. So I loaded up my spray gun with a little primer and I started spraying that door white. And then when I got one side done, as you can see, you just flip it over and la-di-dee, la-di-da, spray the other side. In no time, I had the door completely painted, and while I was doing that, Craig was nice enough to be inside the Airstream working on painting the actual walls. The next morning, once the paint was dry, I came out and I reinstalled that pocket door hardware, and then it was back into the Airstream for the final installation. It took a little bit of work. I was trying to be really careful not to scrape the door on anything and ding up that fresh paint, but with not too much effort, I managed to get it locked in place, and it slid pretty nice. The only problem was there was no track to keep the door in the correct position. So I got a little piece of aluminum angle iron and some felt, and I made my own track. See, this will just screw to the floor down here, and then the door can ride right inside there. It rubs up against the felt so it won't scratch up the door, and it'll keep it in the correct position. The only thing I gotta figure out is some sort of latch system, but I'll deal with that later. Now, the final step. Installing the table that I made in a previous video that will also collapse down to become the bed at the front of the Airstream. If you're thinking that looks like a cutting board that I'm using as a spacer, you're right. That is 100% a cutting board. I just needed the table to be about an inch taller, and that cutting board just happened to be the perfect height. So, why not? Installing the table was super easy. After centering the base on the tabletop, I just set the tabletop in place and screwed the base to the floor. Then the tabletop just collapses down on this kaleidoscope base. You lock it in place, and then these custom upholstered cushions, you just pull all the backs off here, and they should, if I measured everything correctly, perfectly fill that void and create a nice, comfy sleeping area. We even got custom sheets to fit this exact size and shape, so that's pretty cool. Speaking of custom stuff, the last thing we had to do, I feel like I've said the last thing like 10 times now, but really, this is like the last thing, was to unbox and install the mattress for the back bed that I also had custom made with a cool hinge feature halfway through the middle of the mattress. Now, if you're wondering, why do you need a hinge in a mattress? It's so that you can flop it over on itself like this, and then you can still access all the storage compartments that I put towards the front of the underside of the bed. Ooh, handy. And with that, no joke, the Airstream is done. I mean, it's done. I even added those latches on the bathroom door that I said I was going to do later, and I just didn't show you. And I also decided this was a great time to pull down the awning on the outside and really just bask in all the glory of the completed Airstream. It was almost 2 years ago that my wife found a listing on Craigslist for this 26-foot Airstream land yacht metal thing. I went up to Seattle, I bought it from a guy for $10,000, which seemed like a ridiculous amount of money for a giant piece of metal with dents and dings. There was nothing on the inside. The outside was literally green from all sorts of earth growing all over it. And as I was towing that home, I thought this might be the biggest mistake I have ever made. But if you let those kind of thoughts stop you from pursuing your dreams, you're never going to accomplish anything in life. Some of my favorite projects are the ones that were the worst to complete. The ones that were a total grind, and at the time I just thought this is not worth it. But when you finally get through it, when you finally get to the end, somehow all those late nights, those countless hours, the frustration, it all just seems to melt away. Sure, this Airstream was fun to build, but it will be really fun to enjoy with my family, and that makes it all worthwhile. Oh my gosh, I just had the worst dream that I spent $150,000 in half a year remodeling an Airstream. Well, at least it's done. And now we can just relax and remember that I just bought an entire fixer-upper over in Central Oregon. When are these projects ever going to end? Thanks for watching. Check the video description. There's links down there to who knows what at this point. There's a link to our Patreon, though, where you get a ton of behind-the-scenes footage. So go check that out. And like and subscribe. And we'll see you over in Central Oregon after I get some much-needed sleep.